seems like Michelle and myself were drawing from the same source today when we chose our readings. I'd been talking about healing everything and being the source of healing for everything, and how everything we do and say and think affects the cosmos. So at 5 a.m. on Friday morning, I woke up with the following kind of poem or dream vision, which I recorded. Every sentient being is a missionary, a Gnostic intermediary, unveiling the sacred in the apparently secular. Every poet is a priest, eloquently articulating the Logos. Every artist gives a body to the archetype of the divine mystery. Every musician is a minister of the sacrament of sound. Every mystic is a mobile tabernacle, an ark of the covenant, awakening us to our true nature. Every breeze is a conductor, teaching the languid tree leaves to dance and to whisper the secret names of God. Every ocean washes clean yesterday's busily trafficked beach so that the seeker may follow today's freshly laid tracks of the Master. Every sunbeam is a shaft of God's grace, imprinting Gaia with the algorithm of life. Can you feel the tingle of the transcendent? These are words inspired by God. So if I were to give today's homily a title, I would call it Cosmic Missionaries and Gnostic Intermediaries. So today I want to recap the last two homilies where I spoke about healing at every level, from healing my personal history to the family lineage, to planet, to the cosmos itself. And last week I started with the story of my sister Ethna. There were 6 of us in the family, 3 boys and 3 girls. And Ethna died very tragically on the 26th of January in 1995. She was living in Scotland and she died of a brain aneurysm. And I spoke about that in last Sunday's homily. And then, wonder of wonders, on Wednesday, I get an email from Scotland, and I replied to it, and here's what happened. I'm going to read them out to you. This was on Wednesday, July 12th. Somebody in Scotland. I have just watched the above podcasts, which put a shiver down my spine when you mentioned your sister Ethna. Did she live in Aberdeen? As there are many things that you said that cannot be a coincidence. If so, I have a wonderful story about her during our shiatsu course in the early 90s. If it is not her, I deeply apologize for any hurt I may have caused. Regards, Alfie Ferguson. So I wrote back immediately, Dear Alfie, a million thanks to you for reaching out to me. What a wonderful gift. Yes, she and her husband Alan and their 3 girls, Tanya, Sasha, and Alex, lived in Aberdeen. And I visited them a few times. I would dearly love to hear this story. I'm so looking forward to it. Namaste, Seán ÓLaoire. And I get a response back from him. Hi, Seán. I first met your sister through a group in Aberdeen called East-West Group, where we learned the basic skills of shiatsu, qigong, and traditional Chinese medicine. Then it was off to the pub. The opportunity then arose through the Aberdeen School of Shiatsu to sign up for a 3-year diploma course to do this professionally and treat members of the public. This was a big commitment of study, which included weekends. This story is about one of those weekends. It was late Sunday afternoon and everyone was getting fatigued. Neil, one of the instructors, decided to try something different. We had to pair up, so it was me and Ethna. We were told to kneel, face each other, and focus on each other's right eye, and then take in turns to say namaste to each other. Well, this lasted about 40 seconds when Ethna started smiling and giggling. We refocused a couple of times, but the giggling ended up as a belly laugh. And I had to tell her, stop looking at me. My stomach muscles are aching. Then from the other end of the room, we could hear others laughing at us laughing. Eventually, everyone was in tears of laughter, even the teachers. This went on for about 7 or 8 minutes. We finished by all sitting in a circle and discussed how the laughter had changed the energy in the room, and that the healing we had received by the laughter started by your sister was greater than any shiatsu we received that weekend. I remember her funeral at Garthdee in Aberdeen, and although the students came from all over the country, every one of the class turned up that day. I used to have photographs of us all, but as usual, someone borrowed them and I never got them back. But I've put out feelers. Here's hoping. Alfie Ferguson, wishing you a life of spiritual health. I thought immediately of Ingrid and telling us to watch out for synchronicities this week. Well, that was one hell of a synchronicity. So I want to go in then to kind of a recap of where I've gone for the last 2 weeks. And I started with 3 kind of considerations, which I then folded into a new theory of my own. Firstly, I looked at the notion of the science of retrocausation, that sometimes the effect comes before the cause. And I gave you a simple example of my grandfather, Big Daddy, who worked as a hospital orderly and got paid every Friday night. And then on Friday night, the rent man came to collect his dues. So we get to live in the house Monday through Friday on the basis of a promised future payment on Friday. And then on Saturday morning, my grandmother, Big Mammy, would go up to Crowley's shop where we got our groceries on a daily basis, but she couldn't afford to pay for them Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So now on Saturday, she's paying for them. And so it was like future payments generating present benefits. So there's a real world example of kind of retrocausation. You're getting present day benefits from future payments. And I talked about some scientific studies. Dean Radin, who was the scholar in residence at the Institute of Nomadic Sciences in Petaluma, who's conducted a lot of experiments on retrocausation, where you put somebody in a room in front of a computer screen, and he's in a different area, and he flash images, on the screen. And there can be babies laughing, kittens playing, or car crashes, or people getting wounded. And the individual, the subject, is rigged up to a galvanic skin response, which measures the electrical conductance of the skin, and that correlates with emotional states. And what he found was that typically the person will have an emotional reaction some nanoseconds before the image is actually flashed onto the screen. So that's retrocausation. The image, which is still to come, is creating a present emotional reaction measured by the galvanic skin response. And I had a kind of a colleague, Helmut Schmidt, who was in the University of Texas, working with the guy who monitored my own study of prayer, William Broad. And Helmut Schmidt had conducted a huge experiment where he randomized numbers in a generator, over 1 million numbers randomly created in a computer, but not displayed. And then he brought people in to see if they could influence the randomization process and throw it out just by thinking about it and by intentionality. And he found out that as long as the data were not ever displayed and there was no consciousness witnessing it, you could throw out the randomization process. And he found out that even having a goldfish in the room, if he put the data on the screen and only the goldfish could see the data, then it could not be subsequently changed. And the realization, of course, is that nature doesn't make up its mind about anything until there's some kind of an observer. So it wasn't even that they were kind of changing pre-existing data in the computer, but that the computer hadn't agreed to generate data until there was some consciousness, some viewing consciousness ready to observe it. So that was the first piece of the puzzle. The second piece of the puzzle was the whole research on near-death experiences, which have fascinated me for a long time. And the part that really fascinates me most is the notion of the life review, that after we die, there's a guide who steps us through our entire lifetime and gives us an encyclopedic review of the incarnation just ended. Except that we don't just get to view it and to say, oh yeah, I remember when I said that, or yeah, I remember when I did that. Is that I can crawl inside the skin of everybody who was affected by what I said or did and experience that retroactively as they experienced it at the time. And then there's this extraordinary ripple effect that what I did or what I said or what I thought had this ripple effect that moved throughout space and throughout time. In fact, I claim that every single action, and by action I mean thought and word as well, I think that every action creates a separate timeline, that it spins off a parallel reality that eventually involves everything and every being. And therefore, when we look at history, as we understand history, history as it's written in the books is simply the trajectory of a particular timeline created by the cumulative sum of all the choices made by all the players. If we'd made different choices or different thoughts, history would be different. So that was the second piece of the puzzle. And the third piece of the puzzle was the notion of pareidolia, which psychology regards as a kind of a problem. Pareidolia allegedly is the mistake of inferring meaningful patterns from utterly random data. So you look up into the sky, for instance, and you say, oh my, look, there's an elephant out there, because the cloud is in the shape of an elephant. And that's pareidolia, that you're mistakenly inferring meaningful patterns from utterly random data. Now, I don't see it like that at all. I believe that pareidolia, in fact, is the ability to call into a level of reality any object whatsoever through our attention and through our intention. It is a quantum mechanical double-slit experiment writ large. And so in some senses, I believe that ultimate reality is an infinite matrix of pixels that can be turned on or off, thus creating a universal language which is capable of bringing to our senses any image from its potential state to its actualized state. And it's based on the notion of Boolean algebra, binary mathematics, zeros and ones, on or off. And the computer screen you're looking at right now is basically Boolean algebra. Your screen is composed of tens of thousands of pixels, each one of which is either on or off. And that's creating the images that you're looking at right now. So that was the third piece of the puzzle. So I put those three pieces together and then created my own notion of retrocausal healing. So just as the physical cosmos itself is expanding at an extraordinary rate, about 2.6 million miles an hour. That's how much the physical universe is expanding. I think there's a corresponding kind of expansion of the metaphysical universe. And as far as healing is concerned, I see 4 stages to that process. Firstly is my willingness and the necessity of my healing my personal history, who I have been in this lifetime or in previous lifetimes. How do I get to heal that history? The second stage is learning to heal the family tree, the lineage of which I'm a product. The third stage is healing Gaia herself, the very, very planet. And then finally, there's the healing of the cosmos. So I dealt with those 2 Sundays ago. I talked about personal healing, and last Sunday about the other 3. So just a very, very brief recap of them. So imagine during your life review with your guide that you could ask the guide to tweak any act, in the review. You're watching your past lifetime and you say, hold it a tick. That action that I just performed there, or that word that I spoke right there, what if we tweaked that? What if I had said something different or done something different? Can you tell me what kind of a timeline that would have spun off? And then the guide just does exactly that. We tweak the action in particular, substitute a different action, and then we watch a totally different timeline getting spun off with all of its corollary effects on the cosmos and its inhabitants. Now, since we're outside of time, once we die, we shuffle off this mortal coil, there is no time anymore. We live in eternity. And so it is possible to retweak any of these spun off lifetimes and timelines again and again and again, and watch what the resulting scenarios are. So we get to view, what would life on planet Earth or the cosmos look like if I had said A instead of B or done C instead of D, and we get to see the results. Now, I think then with the guide, we could say, okay, could we grade those on a scale of really bad outcomes to really good outcomes? And then perhaps in my next incarnation, I'm cognizant of the actions or the words or the thoughts that created the really good outcome. And now I parachute into a new incarnation and I'm creating a new lifetime in order to take a newer or a better, more life-affirming and life-promoting action. And since I do not believe in a kind of a linear, a kind of a one incarnation at a time in strict chronological sequence, I foresee rather the parallel processing and the mutual interactive learning that will result from blending all of these lifetimes together. And I came up with this kind of the silly metaphor of a cup of tea. You take a cup of tea, you put a tea bag in the cup, and you pour boiling water into it, and now you're enjoying your cuppa. But then you get distracted and you leave the cup on the desk for 10 minutes, and you come back, and now it's tepid. Now you got two choices. You can dump it, what's remaining, and dump out the tea bag, or just put more boiling water, and the pre-existing tea bag will take it up. So you could simply change the outcome by adding boiling water. You don't have to dump the existing water, or get rid of the old tea bag. You can rather just put fresh boiling water. So, and I played around with this for a little bit, this metaphor. So imagine that the tea bag is like the metaphor of the soul, and the boiling water is a metaphor for incarnation. And incarnation, the boiling water, is what extracts the energy from the soul. So it's your incarnation that creates the taste that your soul is going to leave in the imprint of your lifetimes. Now, sometimes, to play around with the metaphor, incarnation gets us into hot water. But that's precisely how we harvest the soul to guide our growth. So in the same way, I believe that it's possible to heal myself, not by unhappening a previous lifetime or previous lineage, but by adding a new one. So the blend then is an improvement that didn't need to pretend that the previous history never occurred. It's rather, you can't dump it anywhere because everything is contained in the Akashic records, but you can heal the past and grow into the present and the future by being cognizant of every thought and every word and every deed. And so you can then turn the kind of even a foul-tasting past into a pleasant present and a sacred future. So that was my hit on healing my own personal history. I looked then at the notion of healing the family tree. And I had created my family tree many, many years ago by writing to schools I had attended and parishes in which family members had lived, and created finally this visual diagram. And when I looked at all the data, and I looked at myself as I'm positioned among the data, there were 4 possible interpretations of the visual image I had. The first interpretation is that everything from the past vectored in order to produce me. So it could be a real narcissistic look at it. Look at all the people that were necessary in order to create me. So everything vectored in on me. Or I could say, since I'm the product of the past, I need to have gratitude for all of the players of the past. There will be a second way of looking at that. The second way, when I look at the physical diagram, is to look at like an hourglass. Everything, at the bottom half of it, everything came from me. If I had kids and grandkids and great-grandkids, look at all the progeny I've created. So everything came from me. Or I could say, rather, I have a responsibility for the future. I have to make sure that whatever children I give birth to, or grandchildren that come with that union, that I have a sense of responsibility that I'm creating a future in which they can live. So, for instance, Native American Indian tradition talk about making decisions predicated on the results of the 7th generation yet to be born. So that's a second way of looking at the physical diagram. The third way was looking at it as a kind of the hourglass. It starts really, really wide, narrows down to me, and then spreads out again, as if somehow I'm the most important part of it. But there's another way of looking at that, which is that in some senses, I and you and every single individual is a conduit, a place where the past and the future get to dance with each other. And the final way of looking at that family diagram is to look at the entire matrix and look at it. I call it a planetary neuroanatomy that's showing us that we're all interconnected. We're all one. We're all on the circuits. Every one of us is a neuron on a global neuronal circuit. Now, somebody asked me then, what are some of the actual techniques for healing at an individual level or at a family level? And I mentioned a few last Sunday. The first one is past life regression. Seeing a psychologist, who's qualified to do past life regression. And for me, past life regression has 2 purposes. The first one is to promote personal evolution. And the second one is to promote the soul group or the family healing. So that's one technique available to us. The second technique is called life between lives. It was created by Michael Newton, a psychologist many, many years ago, where he talked about what happens at the end of one incarnation before the next incarnation begins, that time in between, the life between lives. Buddhism and Hinduism would call that the Bardo state. And what he discovered, having regressed over 14,000 people, is that the same kind of things occur again and again and again. That after a person has died, in between then and the next incarnation, they meet deceased family members. There's some kind of a guide that encounters them. There's a life review. Often they're sent to some kind of a healing spa. If their death has proved really, really traumatic, they'll go to some kind of a healing spa. At some stage, they'll be introduced to a council of elders who've monitored all of their previous incarnations and are looking at how they can continue to grow. And then finally, you go back to school. And this is the school Ethna talked about. She said, I'm at the university. When Ethna appeared to Della in her dream, she wrote her a letter in which Ethna said, hi, Della, this is Ethna. I am really, really happy, and I'm at the university. And the university literally means the school of the cosmos. And so that's part of the life between lifetimes. That's the second technique. A third technique, I believe, is what I call a preconception contract, that groups of souls, get together in between lifetimes and they create a contract that they will come into incarnation at roughly the same time. Some will be parents or grandparents even, or friends or family, in order to create a world situation which affords each individual the ideal circumstances in order for that person or that family or that community to grow. And I suggest that we choose people from two different groups be part of our incarnational family. We choose people from our soul pod, those with whom we've had previous loving incarnations, and we choose people from what I call our shadow pod, people with whom we've had a difficult time in the past. We're going to call them enemies, or they're going to call us enemies. And they are as important in our incarnational experiences as the family and the friends are. And then having arrived, we engage in what I believe is just improv theater or psychodrama. There's no plot, there's no script. We have our previous histories. We know the previous histories of everybody we're coming in with, and we said yes anyway. We knew exactly the world situation into which we were parachuting, and we said yes anyway. But now we come in, and there is no script, and there is no plot. You're free to think what you want to think, to say what you want to say, and to do what you want to do. And then the drama will unfold as others react to what you're doing, and you're reacting to what they're doing. So that would be a look at healing the family tree. I then had a look at what does it mean to heal the planet itself, to heal Gaia. And I'm fascinated by this beautiful notion in Judaism. It's found in the Mishnah, which is a classical rabbinic teaching of the 3rd century. It's called Tikkun Olam. And Tikkun Olam literally means the healing of the planet. Now, there have been many efforts to do that. And I mentioned, for instance, transcendental meditation and research they did. And they generated a mathematical formula that suggested that if you could get the square root of 1% of the world's population in the same physical location meditating together, you could shift, the consciousness of the planet. And they achieved that twice, once in the Maharishi Institute in Iowa and once in Holland. Now, when these studies were done, the population of planet Earth was was 6.4 billion people. Now, when you do the mathematics on it, the square root of 1% of 6.4 billion people is simply 8,000 souls. So that's what they did. Got 8,000 people together, on 2 occasions, and then looked at international press and the reports of violence throughout the world. So it's not like they were generating their own data. They were looking at publicly available data to show what the effects were. Now, every human being then, I believe, is a missionary. You volunteer to be here and you volunteer to be here now for 4 reasons, I believe. The first reason is you and I are the ways in which God experiences. Because if God is all there is, there's no possibility for experiences. So there's this notion of holographic fractals. In Judaism, it's called netzotzim, that God self-fractures into a myriad of sparks of the divine. And these sparks of the divine then go out and they generate experiences for God. So like the incarnational aspect of God is generating experiences for the transcendent aspect of God. So that's the first reason that you decided to be a missionary, to provide experiences for God. And the second reason was so that you could experience growth by separation and not just read about it, in heaven. There's a huge difference between experiencing what it's like to be separated allegedly from God and not just read about what it might look like on paper. The second reason. The third reason that you're a missionary is because you volunteered to try to wake up other people to their Buddha nature. You came onto the planet to try to wake up other individuals with whom you react to their innate Buddha nature. And the fourth reason is you wanted to try to create Christ consciousness on the very planet itself. So then I believe that a missionary is a Gnostic intermediary. A missionary is not somebody who's trying to bend, a new population to his own philosophy of life or his own religious system. That is not a missionary. A missionary is a Gnostic intermediary, one who interfaces between two great systems, whether they're language systems or cosmological systems or cultural systems. That as a missionary in Kenya, my job was to go and to kind of, as an Irish Catholic, to say, here's my experience of the divine. What is your experience of the divine? And having been raised in Gaelic, as a little child and studying Irish folklore and mythology and proverbs, I remember an old man telling me one time, he said, if Christianity had never come to Ireland, we could live according to the proverbs. He was absolutely right. And that's one of the things I would say to my parishioners in Kenya. If Christianity had never come to Africa, you could live according to your proverbs. And so the Gnostic intermediary is the person who's able to share the proverbs and the mythology and the stories, which are the archived wisdom of a culture, so that both cultures can benefit from it. And so that's what I mean by being a missionary. And for you as an individual, there's this Gnostic intermediary, this exchange, this cross-fertilization between your incarnated spacesuit and the disincarnated version of yourself, between your soul, and your flesh body. So you're the Gnostic intermediary between those two things. I suggest as well that when we talk about life, there is only one life. It is the life of God. It is the grace of God, and it permeates everything that exists. This one single life permeates all beings at all stages of those beings. And so as a human being, there's only one life force permeating the 8 billion of us right now. It's God's grace. Whether we're in a pre-incarnational phase, an incarnational phase, or a post-incarnational phase, it is the single same life permeating everything. And every oak tree, and every kitty cat, and every extraterrestrial, and every angelic being is animated by the same life force of the one. Now, when we think then about healing the planet, I suggest that the planet itself has 7 different levels of reality. I call them the physiosphere, which is the third rock from the sun, and then the atmosphere, which is the womb created around this rock, and then the biosphere, which are the beings that were gestated, and birthed from this, the flora and the fauna. And then the 4th level is what Tyler de Chardin called the noosphere, the sheath of consciousness that surrounds the biosphere. And we're moving at this stage between the biosphere and the noosphere, and it's a very dangerous transition. There's a place beyond that, I call it the animosphere, the sheath, the soul sheath that surrounds the sheath of consciousness. There's another one, the 6th layer, I call it the pneuma shield, and that is the sphere of spirit itself. And then finally, there's the cosmosphere, unity consciousness. So when we think about then Tikkun Olam, or the healing of the planet, it is not just about healing the biosphere, but about all the levels of Gaia. And in order to be healing individuals, you must learn to kind of experience the 7 levels of your own body, your physical body, your etheric body, your astral body, your mental body, your psychic body, your soul body, and then finally your source self. So unfortunately, we're living on a planet right now in which we're conducting what I call Gaia side, with our chemtrails and weather modification and HARP and nuclear war. We're polluting our land with GMO crops and pesticides and herbicides. We're polluting our air with chemicals, chemtrails and 5G. We're polluting our water systems, rivers, lakes, and oceans. And now finally, they're hoping to pollute even fire, blocking sunlight from reaching the earth itself. The sun is the source of all life on planet Earth. And now they want to pull down the blinds. Moreover, the sun delivers more data and more information to planet Earth in 5 minutes than is contained in all of the libraries of the world right now. And they want to block that. And imagine what's going to happen. So when we look then at, we're talking about climate issues, or what I've called in the past planetary pollution by plastic, it will not be healed by merely attending to the biosphere, but by ascending in our own spirit level and meeting Gaia's spirit level. And so I say that the spiritless atheists who run the soulless WEF can never save Gaia because they understand neither her nor even their own selves. They have never understood that Gaia is a spirit being, a very advanced soul, and that they themselves, in fact, are soul beings. So any efforts on their part to heal the planet are fraught with disaster. I went on then last Sunday, I talked about healing the cosmos. And I talked about an experience I had in January of 2006 with a good friend of mine, Matt McKay, who's trained in Life Between Lives, where we did a 4-hour regression in which I experienced my own life between lives. And one of the most important features of that for me was when I was getting ready to come back down and incarnate as Seán this time, I found myself on what I call the launching pad, with lots of other earthbound souls who were also ready for incarnation on planet Earth. But realizing that there were other souls in this launching pad who were going into different dimensions, different planets, different galaxies, who had different forms, and they were all missionaries in a sense to the cosmos. And realizing that there was extraordinary admiration for the people who are volunteering for incarnation on planet Earth, because it's one of the toughest rides, in the cosmos itself. So anybody with the chutzpah to volunteer for incarnation on planet Earth, hats off to them. And there are 8 billion of us right now. And I would safely say that probably well over 7 billion of us are fast asleep. We have no idea who we are or why we came. And so instead of being missionaries, we're just conniving to make the situation even worse. So to wind up, I want to talk about what kinds of practices then heal the past. And the key to all healing, I believe, is mindfulness, self-awareness with a capital S. Self-awareness is not the ego's fascination with the spacesuit, but rather the soul's identification with our source self. And we do this by our attention, what we choose to attend to, and by intention, a kind of a cosmic compassion. And therefore, wherever you find yourself right now, and whatever circumstances you're in, you are in the ideal position to be a healing agent. You don't need to be someplace else and have a different kind of a character in order to achieve what you've come to achieve. Be who you are, as long as you realize that who you are is your soul self. And in conclusion, last week, I played around with the mathematics of it. And I showed a very simple formula that 2 to the power of n will give you the number of ancestors you had in every generation. So 2 to the power of 1 is 2. You've got 2 parents. 2 to the power of 3 is 8. You've got 8 great-grandparents. If you take the number 10, 2 to the power of n is 1,024, which means you have 1,024 great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. So there's 8 greats and then grandparents and parents. Now, if each generation is approximately 25 years, 10 generations is 250 years. So somewhere around the Declaration of Independence in 1776, the following set of miracles had to happen. 512 women, half of that number, 1,024 people, 512 women had to meet and marry 512 men and have children in order for you to be on the planet right now. So how many cultures, how many races, how many nations have conspired to create you? And imagine all the apparent coincidences that needed to happen in order for those 1,024 people to meet. Except that I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in synchronicities. And so the synchronicities are that the preconception contracts allied to the energy of the cosmos is the reason why you are you today. To end with a postscript, going right back to the beginning of today. When I read Alfie Ferguson's story about Ethna and realized that Ethna's laughter created a ripple in space and in time. And 30 years later, her laughter then is bringing joy and laughter now. And I wondered when I read Alfie's letter, how many people in that room in Scotland in the early 1990s who were doing the shiatsu training, how many people in that room carried the energy of Ethna's laughter into their homes that day and into their lives subsequently and into their cosmologies? And then my question for myself and for you right now is, how much laughter are you bringing into the lives of others. Namaste, my brothers and sisters. So let's open up to a Q&A.
I have a question about how the blinds are proposed to be pulled down on the sun. That I never have heard of that. So, and thank you for the information about laughter, because laughter is one of my favorite things. I love funny movies.
Okay, so there's a document presented at the moment in the US Congress coming from the White House, which is suggesting a whole series of experiments where they're literally trying to knock out sunlight. And if you want to hear a really good kind of response to this, go on to Greg Braden Official. He does about a 40-minute presentation where he goes through that document and shows, he's a geologist, what the side effects of that kind of craziness are going to look like. So some of the arguments are technical. They have to do with the biochemistry of sunlight, and different ingredients that they're attempting to spray into the atmosphere. So it well behooves anybody who's concerned about the fate of the planet to check out that document. It's publicly available, and look at Greg Braden's analysis of it. We need to educate ourselves on what's being proposed right now. So that's what I mean by the solar problem.
Last week you mentioned Tikkun Olam.
Yes.
How do you spell that?
It's Tikkun, Tikkun Olam, O-L-A-M, and in Hebrew it means healing the planet.
Question about the term tikkun. Just that one, I've actually heard it in a different context, more in the Kabbalistic context, where some have, I guess, interpret it to mean like rectification, and that when we incarnate here on Earth, or maybe anywhere else actually, that we have to experience the opposite from maybe what we experienced in the past life. So, for example, if you're unfortunate enough, let's say, to be born a drug addict, maybe in the past life you were born very, very healthy and you had a great life, but you're here to experience the difficulties and the challenges of overcoming that for your greatest good and the good of everyone else. Is that understanding of tikkun the same as what you're referring to Tikkun Olam? Only just because I've never heard it in any other context. That's a brilliant question, brilliant observation. And I'm amazed at the depth of your learning and the scope of your scholarship, Sophia. Tikkun, you're absolutely right, the rectification process. So tikkun actually means healing or rectification. Olam literally means the planet or the earth itself. So when you put the two pieces together, it's about the rectification of the planet itself, so healing. So when I use Tikkun Olam together, it has to do with a global realization of the very kind of a Gaia herself. But to go back into Tikkun itself, the notion of rectification, that is a beautiful teaching of Kabbalah, and in some senses, it's connected up to the notion of karma and into my notion of preconception contracts. For me, karma is not the punitive mechanism by which I'm being punished in previous incarnations, being punished in present incarnation for mistakes I made in previous ones. Rather, it's that having sat down with my guides and the Council of Elders, I figured out, what is the lesson I need to learn from my previous performances? Where have I dropped the ball? And so, for instance, if I was somebody who was had no compassion, for the marginalized, I see drug addicts, homeless people, and I say, why don't they get a job already? And I pass by. And that I might then choose the next time to be born in such a situation where I am a drug addict and to feel, what is it like to be kind of ignored by others, the self-righteous? But that we're doing this as a community and we're doing it, intentionally and voluntarily. It's not that we're being punished for previous mistakes. It's that if you really want to grow, you need to experience compassion from all levels of compassion. And so not just the giver of compassion, but the recipient of compassion as well. In order to understand compassion, I need to be both the giver and the receiver. And so I will then create lifetimes in which I get to experience what it is like to be at both, to be at all stages of this. So this notion of tikkun then in Kabbalah is really beautiful. It's rectification in the sense of, healing the entire soul's journey. So realizing that I have learned to experience all of the ways of being human, and I've learned to be loving in all of these,
whether I'm a disadvantaged or privileged, whether I have a genius IQ or I'm a Down syndrome, child or whatever. I get to experience the incarnation from all these places and learn how to love in all these ways. So that's the beauty of Tikkun itself, the rectification process. And then you ally it with the word Olam, which literally means the planet. And ours. How do you do that for the planet itself? Brilliant question, brilliant observation.
2 questions. So techniques are past life regression, life between lives, or the bardo, and the preconception contract.
Right.
Have you ever experienced any of those? Have you ever done work with somebody, and what type of people, what type of healers would help you with that?
Yes, I have experienced all of the 3. And so I'm trained as a clinical psychologist. I trained for a year in London in hypnotherapy. I also did it as part of my PhD studies here in the States. And so I've utilized hypnotherapy quite significantly in my own clients. I've undergone hypnotherapy, and I had the Life Between Life session in January 2006 with a good friend of mine, Matt McKay, who's also a clinical psychologist. And he regressed me for a 4-hour session, which was tape recorded and which I've subsequently used. So, and then I created this notion of a preconception contract myself, this agreement we make. So I've experienced all of those because I've examined what do I think my contract is with the significant people in my life, all the way from my childhood, as a little boy who was raised by his grandparents for 6 years, and then by the other grandparents for another 4 years, spending time in 3 different continents, spending 14 years in East Africa, spending now 36 years in the United States. And so all of the different people whom I've encountered, and realizing that there are some people whom when you meet them, you realize, this is not just a passing acquaintance. This is somebody who's part of the soul contract group, and there's an instant recognition. And so watching for those people. Yeah.
So if somebody wanted to pursue their preconception contracts or find out about them, is that something that you do, or is that is that a hypnosis type of thing?
Yes, I'll use different words for it. That's a moniker I created myself years ago. But basically, it's looking at what is your mission and your purpose in life. So what is your personal cosmology? So on my website, I've devoted an entire section to how you create your personal cosmology. So that's a really good resource if you want to examine that.
Thank you.
I suggested, and I've spoken many times in homilies about the preconception contract. And the skeleton of it is the answer to 4 questions. When you say God, what do you mean, Kanda? When you say I, what do you mean? When you say neighbor, what do you mean? And when you say life mission, what do you mean by that? And you build your entire cosmology around that's the skeleton of a personal cosmology. But the personal cosmology, it must make your heart sing. It can't be somebody else's. You got to fashion one for yourself. Now you can kind of be guided by others, but you have to create it because it has to answer your own unique experiences of life. So it must be adequate to explaining everything you experience. It must make your soul sing. It also must stretch you out of your comfort zone. And finally, you need to constantly keep updating it as you generate new experiences. So if you go onto the website and look at the personal cosmology, that's the kind of embedded in that is the notion of a preconception contract.
I've struggled with this problem all my life. I cannot integrate this idea of growth with God, and then what is the goal? Why am I a pawn, supposedly with a free will? It's incomprehensible to me.
You should have been a philosopher, Rashid. You're asking the real
I'm
deep
just,
yeah.
Yes, I'm just very lost. I was born a Muslim, and I rejected quite a bit of it because I don't have access to the authentic stuff. So, whatever was handed down. And And then I know that I have a lot of joy when I find something out for myself.
Yes. Yes.
I have true joy then. I feel an expansion. But again and again, I come to the idea, what am I doing here? What is the purpose?
Yes.
And I know that this is perhaps a $1 trillion question. I wonder if you can comment, please.
I can always comment. I'm Irish. So you folded so many important pieces into that. So let me firstly unpack the epistemological piece, Rashid. And so epistemology is a branch of philosophy that deals with how do we know what we know. Basically, I believe that there are 3 ways in which we know what we know. The first one is we take some authority figure, and we say, my teacher told me this, or the news media said this, or a scientist told me that. So the first way is to believe what somebody told us. The second piece is personal experiences. Now, personal experiences are better than the first, but they're not infallible. So
that's right.
Personal experience tells you that the sun went down at 8:15, yesterday evening, but it took light 8 minutes to come from the sun to you. So it went down actually 8 minutes before that. And so personal experience is not infallible, but it's a whole lot better than just believing what other people told you.
Right.
And the third piece, epistemological tool, is, self-inquiry, in the sense of figuring stuff out for yourself, gathering all the pieces that you've observed empirically through all forms of experience, and then creating a model that makes sense to you. And that's what I mean by the personal cosmology. How do you answer these questions? Who is God for you? Who is Rashid? When you think of Rashid, are you identified with this physical spacesuit? Are you identified with an eternal part of yourself? When you say neighbor, what does that mean? And when you think about what's my purpose, to dig into those. Now, you mentioned coming from an Islamic background. There's a famous Hindu saint one time that said, when you meet the tracks of a religion in the desert, follow them. But don't go where they're leading, go where they've come from. So you go backwards, because again and again and again, bureaucracies build around, spiritual insights and create all kinds of garbage. And so, but then you have to look at the great treasures of your tradition, like a Rumi, this extraordinary mystical character. If you go to the teachings of Rumi or the poetry of Rumi, that for me is the essence of the Islamic insight, divorced from the trappings. If you go to Meister Eckhart in Roman Catholicism, you can divorce, his extraordinary mystical insights from the Roman Catholic Church at the time, which was trying to bring him before the Inquisition. So you have to differentiate between the extraordinarily spiritual impulses that gave rise to prophetic utterance on the one hand, and then the organizations that built around those. But where you are right now, what I would say to you is this: you have to create your own. You have to create a personal cosmology that answers those 4 questions for Rashid. Don't take anybody else's answers for it. Dig deeply into those, and it's going to take you into dark places, because you're going to have to experience or look at, the tragedies of our world, historically and currently, and understand now, why would a soul subject itself to that? You have to understand that time is an illusion, and that, the present, incarnation is a little blip on the eternal trajectory of a soul. And that sometimes it is important to experience darkness in order to appreciate light. It is important to experience separation from source in order to experience union with the divine. And so everything you experience is actually grist for the mill of your growth. Create your own model and pick from those sources that kind of inspire you rather than those that kind of deflate you. Brilliant question.
I was just thinking about the things that I've learned the past few weeks. I'm a person who, my morning coffee and the tea I drink all day long, I get distracted and I'm constantly adding hot water. And so the last couple of weeks, analogies have been bringing me, it's almost like a mindfulness practice that's been inserted in my brain by your homilies. I pour water in and then I start thinking, okay, this means something else. I didn't do it so mindfully before. I just did it because it was cold. And but I started thinking about past relationships, things I've done or said, and going back and what would happen if I had said this or that instead of what actually happened. And then I started thinking that, but that takes the other person out of it. Like if I said something that hurt someone else, I can, my going and just pretending or imagining that I did it a different way, it's like that doesn't include that person. And so I thought that it's like I'm letting myself off the hook without it touching someone, the person that I said or did whatever too. And so then I just thought of calling that person's higher self to me and saying, I want to work this out differently. This has always bothered me, all this time, like, things back in your childhood, the stupid things you do or say to other people and everything. And it's like, what can we do to make this different? So and so that's what I've been doing it that way. And so it's like, it's not like I'm bypassing some heartless, cold thing I may have said or done. And it's like, let's try this differently. We must have chosen to experience each other because we crossed each other's paths. So this has always bothered me. How can we redo this? And so that's just something I wanted to share.
That's beautiful, Denise. Yeah, so a few things I would respond to it with is that even changing your thinking processes is already sending out a different energy. And everybody in the cosmic pool is experiencing the ripples of that energy, not necessarily consciously, but they are experiencing it at a conscious level. So whether or not they're aware of your kind of rethinking or kind of redoing, they're being affected by it. That's the first thing. The second question is then, when you do that consciously, the 12-step program has, various steps with various virtues attached to various steps. Step number 9 in the 12-step program is making amends, trying to undo insofar as you can the damage which has been done. Now, sometimes you can actually do that. You can actually encounter the person, that you've upset in some way, and ask for forgiveness or explain situations. And sometimes you can't, But even the intention of making amends, I think you've come to a brilliant solution. If you can make amends to the higher self of the other person, that's not just a gimmick. That is reality. That, the most important part of you is your higher self, and the most important part of the other is their higher self. And therefore, anything that you do that affects your higher self is going to radiate it out and affect their higher self. And then it's going to trickle down to their kind of physical spacesuit as well, slowly by slowly. And so in some senses, everything you do going forward is actually, it's not undoing what has happened, but it is changing the kind of the balance of power, of the occurrence. And I think you've hit upon a brilliant strategy of engaging your higher self to communicate with the higher self of the other. Good for you. Brilliant strategy.
I just had more of a thing that I wanted to share, really, because I have an easier time understanding big concepts like this when I can read them in a story or see them in a TV show. And when you guys were talking about the Tikkun thing, it made me think of this kids show that you guys might be interested in if you're wanting to explore the concept, where it's Avatar: The Last Airbender, and then it has a shoot off called Legend of Korra. And basically they both deal with past lives and reincarnation, but both of them are really, really good at explaining how you can create healing in this life by learning from your past lives that have very different experiences, but also how your experiences in this life are able to change the way that you interact with the people around you. So you can grow in this life from the person that you were and reach people in a way that you never could have before. And it changes the whole story. The bad guy is suddenly relatable to you because you understand where they're coming from or something. But I thought people might be interested, so I wanted to share it.
That's brilliant, Ireland. Could you put that in the chat, those references? Or
Yes,
yeah,
definitely.
That's awesome. Because I agree totally with you that the greatest way of kind of promoting any kind of deep, spiritual learning is in parable or myth or story form.
Yeah.
And this was Jesus' entire kind of modus operandi. He only dealt with stories and parables as well. So having any kind of storyline that kind of into which those teachings are kind of embedded, that's brilliant. So if you put those up, it'd be great, love.
While you were talking about this, the image occurred to me of us being in the midst of the Kali Yuga, and everything is more extreme before the beginning of a new stage. And that I mean, that used to make me really depressed. Right now, it's making me feel like, okay, we who are incarnated now are entrusted with taking on this extreme good, bad, dark, light conflict that's going on and seems to be intensifying, and even our poor planet is experiencing it. And so I'm just wondering how you feel about the idea that we're a reflection of this process as our entire, as you might say, as God is evolving, even that we're being prepared for this next stage. Because I feel it extremely, especially since my husband passed away, because we spent so much time together and working on the issue between our culture and the native culture and the misunderstandings and all of that. And now I'm just seeing this in a much, much larger framework. And so what do you think?
I think it's brilliant. I mean, we obviously are a reflection of the Kali Yuga right now, but in some senses, we volunteered to be here right now. So we knew what we were coming into, because in some senses, we're meant to be spiritual doulas, or spiritual midwives. You don't bring the doula and the midwife in when the woman is like a month pregnant. You bring her in when she's ready to give birth, and when she's experiencing the contractions and the labor pains. And so all of us on the planet, whether we remember it or not, and the vast bulk of us don't remember it, volunteer to be doulas, and midwives to the movement from Kali Yuga back into a much more spiritual state. So obviously, we're hurting by looking around to see what's happening. We're experiencing the labor right now, but we volunteer to be here now. So we have to realize that we're not here by mistake. We didn't take a wrong turn at, Alpha Centauri and wind up in the wrong planet. So be a doula, be a midwife.
I'll preface my question by saying that the trajectory of the planet is very, very dismal. We've all noticed this. A very famous anthropologist named Ashley Montague appeared in the Johnny Carson show years ago, and Johnny asked him where the planet would be in 200 years. And basically he said, forget it, there's going to be nothing left. So I'm having difficulty living on a planet now. I take it very, I take on too much personally, that the destruction of the planet. And I'm thinking I could not bear to be reincarnated where the planet is, maybe 50 years from now, where the planet has really gone crazy. And then after that, 200 years where there's not much of anything left in the planet. So I'm wondering what your take is on the reincarnation process as far as this planet is concerned. Are there other planets that are in line in the Milky Way that will be reincarnated there and continue working things out? So what's your take on that?
That's a brilliant question, Chris. So there are many, many levels to it. So the first level is that the fact that you're here now and that I'm here now is not accidental. When we incarnate, I believe we're only aware of three things. I'm aware of my own personal history as a soul in previous incarnations, what I'm capable of, what my difficulties are, what my growing edges might be. And I also know the trajectories of all of the other players who are coming in. And I know the state of the world into which I'm parachuting. And so nobody has been blindsided. I'm not expecting a Hitler to behave like a Mother Teresa. You know, I know Hitler's going to behave like a Hitler, but I'm coming in anyway. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that I do not believe I'm aware of all the difficulties we experience, but my soul believes that Gaia herself is an extraordinary soul, and that she's for 4.6 billion years she's dealt with all kinds of vicissitude. There have been 5 other major extinction events that have happened, you know, and if we are going to create the next one, Gaia will survive. Now the question is, will Homo sapiens sapiens, you know, be part of the new Gaia? I don't know that. I also believe that Gaia herself, as I said today, you know, exists at 7 different levels. There's the physiosphere, the atmosphere, the biosphere, the noosphere, the animosphere, the pneumosphere, and the cosmosphere. And so those levels of self are available to Gaia. Now the question is, you know, with what frequency are individual souls vibrating so that they're attracted to a particular different level of her? So if the physiosphere itself were to prove untenable for humans, then those humans that are capable of vibrating at the next frequency of Gaia are going to remain children of Gaia, you know, vibrating at a different frequency. So every soul has a choice, you know. But personally, I believe that even as a physiosphere, that Gaia will survive this period, and that more and more enlightened souls are coming in to be the advanced guard, or kind of the Marines, you know, assaulting the beaches of Normandy in 1944, and that the souls we're experiencing right now, the kind of the indigo children, you know, that these are the waves of kids coming in with a different mindset and a different soul set, you know, to turn around what's happening right now.